I've been a knitter for over 20 years. I have been working in reality television for at least 20 years. I have a unique set of skills whose time is ready to come together as the Game of Wool has premiered in the UK. And boy, do I have some thoughts. So hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, give this video a thumbs up, and find out what I do differently on the Game of Wool. Hello, welcome to my channel. If you are new here, I'm Carrie Craftgeek, and this is where I spread the joy and love of making pretty things with pretty string, normally with 2 sticks. I have been wanting to make a video about Game of Wool ever since it premiered. Unfortunately, life was lifing, and this is the first opportunity that I've really had to sit down and talk about it. But it's kind of a blessing in disguise because I've been able to watch 2 episodes now and really think through my thoughts and my feelings and my opinions of this reality competition show that revolves, well, mostly around knitting, also crochet. I will be talking more about this. Don't worry, crochet folks, I'm not shading crochet. I am going to tell you right up front, my overall impression of Game of Wool is that it's fine. It's mid. I do not think this is the worst thing that's ever happened to knitting. I mean, we are only a few months past the whole SciShow debacle about knitting, but I do think it falls short in several ways. So in this video, I'm gonna cover the things that I would do differently that I think would take Game of Wool from a show that's kind of mid to great, because I am a knitter and crocheter and I don't want a show about my beloved crafts to be mid. I want it to be fantastic. Before I jump into my list of notes that the Game of Wool producers did not ask for, but I'm gonna give them anyway, I wanna explain how I'm watching this show at all. Game of Wool exclusively airs on Channel 4 in the UK and is geo-restricted to that region. But thanks to PROTONVPN, my internet is no longer geo-restricted. I'm allowed to virtually roam the globe with better privacy and security. I chose PROTONVPN because of its security features, bundle of services that come with the subscription, and its ease of use. PROTONVPN offers a 30-day money-back guarantee if you are not satisfied. So you can try their service risk-free and see if the expanded world of entertainment, privacy, and security while online is for you. Of course, I have an affiliate link down in my description box. If you choose to sign up with PROTONVPN, through that link, I earn a small commission, and this does help support my channel. So if you use that affiliate link, thank you so much for that extra level of support. With all that out of the way, let's look at my notes for Game of Wool. Because I am a knitter and a story producer, I am going to knit while I talk, which is actually very common for me. If you want to know details about the project that I'm working on, I will have all of that down in the description box. Now, this first note is one that actually a viewer brought up, and I 100% agree with it, which is I would change the title. I think Game of Wool is fine, but I hate the subtitle, Britain's Best Knitter. It's kind of misleading. First of all, this is not just about finding Britain's best knitter. This is about finding a knitter and crocheter.
This week for our team challenge, Di and Sheila would love for you to work in pairs to crochet a deck chair.
So the show isn't really about finding Britain's best knitter, it's more about finding Britain's best fiber artist. My other issue with the title is I think it sets an unrealistic expectation that we're going to see a group of highly skilled, advanced master knitters dueling it out with their knitting needles. Instead, what we have is a group of knitters whose skill levels range from rather beginner to more advanced.
This whole thing has been absolutely new to me.
I am a massive fan of crochet. I'm not that great at knitting.
So you do use a twisted stitch. Is there a reason for that?
It's just the way I've knit.
Okay.
So that was something new because I'm still learning.
I'm not a crocheter. I am behind.
This competition is the first time I've been designing things, and I just thought, wow, it's really gone from 0 to 100.
The problem is when you have that title, Britain's Best Knitter, you automatically know once you hear someone say, I haven't been knitting that long, that they're not going to stand a chance of winning the show. And it seems unfair to pit master knitters against more beginner ones. I don't know who approved the scripts for these shows, but I don't feel like it was someone who thought knitters would be watching. I feel like after the SciShow debacle, this is a theme for 2025. Episode 1, for me, starts off rough with this quote.
A new generation of knitters are taking the world by storm.
With just 2 needles or a hook, they are testing the limits of creativity.
Like, excuse me, knitting is not done with the hook. I understand this is what's called a cold open, which is like just the very quick beginning of the show where they explain to you the premise and they're trying to jam in a lot of information at once. But the way this is worded makes it sound like knitting and crochet is a difference of tool, which it's not. It actually produces different fabrics. However, it's not until show 2 that we get any clarification on what exactly crochet is versus knitting.
Knitting uses 2 needles to build rows of stitches, while crochet uses a hook to create 1 stitch at a time.
The verbal description, I could nitpick, but I'm gonna let that be, because what in the Finchley graph is this graphic? It looks like it has 4 straight needles in the knitting, and I've never seen a crochet hook that looked like that. It is terrible. I mean, it also just looks incredibly low production, aka cheap. Like, oh my God, I'm offended. I'm offended as a knitter, and frankly, I'm offended as a reality producer. I know how hard it is to explain the difference between knitting and crochet to a general audience in 30 seconds. I really do know, because I have worked on a craft-based show where I had to explain the difference between knitting and crochet to a general audience. So I sympathize with the producers. However, whenever I'm in that type of situation on a show, whether I'm explaining a craft or medical conditions or whatever it is, my goal is always to explain it to a general audience so it makes sense and it doesn't get overly bogged down in details. But at the same time, people who might actually be experts in the area can watch it and go, yeah, that's generally right. Unfortunately, I think the producers of the Game of Wool have really missed the mark in this area. Certainly when it comes to that graphic, but also when it comes to another topic, which really upset the Shetland Organization of Knitters. It's already been widely discussed, but the Fair Isle Challenge in... Oh shoot, dropped a stitch again. The dangers of trying to knit while not looking. Thankfully, I can just use my knitting needles to re-knit those stitches. The way that Game of Wool is set up is each episode there are 2 challenges. The first challenge is what's called the solo challenge, where each individual knitter works on a solo project. And the second challenge is a team challenge. And show 1, the solo challenge has been very controversial. And in my opinion, the producers deserve the blowback that they have gotten. In the episode, the knitters are tasked with making an updated version of a Fair Isle tank top. Now, mind you, to me, that tank top looks more like a sweater vest, but I guess I won't quibble. The problem is that some of the designers update Fair Isle knitting to such a degree that there's hardly any Fair Isle tradition at all. Fair Isle knitting isn't just another word for stranded color work. Fair Isle knitting is a specific tradition that comes from the Shetland Islands of Scotland, and it's distinguished by its use of bands of small graphical motifs that are built with just 2 strands of color being used on any given row. Now, there's a lot more to it than just that, but that is your quick 30-second general audience definition. But this Fair Isle tradition is different from, say, the Scandinavian stranded colorwork traditions that tend to be more pictorial. Think like the ski sweaters with reindeers or trees, or the traditions that you find in Iceland with the stranded colorwork yoke sweaters, or the Bauhaus tradition that comes from Sweden that was developed in the 1930s and 40s. And it's really marked actually by its use of like 2 to 3 colors per row. So all of these are different ways of using stranded color work. So when you're watching Game of Wool and you see one of the contestants' Fair Isle design being comprised of bunnies and hearts, and one band of color work that looks more like slip stitch color work, that's not really speaking to Fair Isle. It feels a bit more like the Scandinavian tradition. Now, I understand that the challenge was to modernize or update Fair Isle knitting, but if you were updating Fair Isle to the extent that it's not even recognizably Fair Isle, we've moved beyond Fair Isle at that point. And the thing is, as a show producer, this whole controversy would be easily fixed by one simple adjustment to the challenge brief. Imagine, if you will, the judges are giving the brief and they say, you have to make a stranded color work tank top that incorporates at least one element of Fair Isle knitting. Now you've set an expectation that these vests are not going to be strictly Fair Isle. You have an opportunity to then jump into a package where you explain what Fair Isle knitting is and how it's distinct from other stranded color work traditions, and the contestants are freed up to design vests without having to live within the smaller box of the Fair Isle tradition. Very simple change. Could have avoided all of this. And you would have had one less reason for the Shetland Organization of Knitters to be upset with your show. Unfortunately, there were more mistakes around the Fair Isle than just how they used Fair Isle, or didn't use Fair Isle, in the sweater vest. In episode 1, cruise ship singer and knitter Gordon is our first knitter cast off the island. I'm sorry, the Magical Yarn Barn. Note to self, change the name of Magical Yarn Barn. If it were magical, the contestants could knit a Fair Isle vest in 12 hours with a proper weight of yarn. By the way, side note, I don't begrudge the show having the knitters work in chunky yarn to try to accomplish this. I mean, unless they're just going to have them knit swatches for everything, they're going to have to be knitting with bigger yarn at times, and that just is what it is. Although, I totally sympathize with Holger.
To tell me that I have to express myself on a super chunky yarn is like asking a vegetarian to express themselves in with a medium of steak or something.
Back to Gordon, and how Gordon, like, justice for Gordon. I'm sorry, I want justice for Gordon. Let me explain. Gordon is the only knitter who actually uses the traditional technique of steeking. And steeking is something that you use in stranded color work where you actually knit extra bits of fabric in the places where you want holes, like armholes or a V-neck. Once you've gotten through that area, you use scissors to cut through that extra fabric to open up the holes. And what this allows you to do is knit in the round for the entire vest. And typically people find knitting stranded color work in the round easier than knitting stranded color work flat. And if you're not used to cutting into your knitted fabric for useful holes, steeking can be very scary looking. But in fact, steeking when done correctly is not scary at all.
It won't ravel out. People think it'll just completely disintegrate, but it won't.
Gordon obviously knew how to use a steek. He did it successfully, and yet there are no kudos for Gordon for his steek technique.
Lovely Fair Isle, and it speaks Scotland.
We're very sad that you ran out of time to finish it because there is so many elements that we really appreciate.
Gordon was hardly the only knitter who didn't finish their work, and one contestant's Fair Isle sweater didn't even get over Tom Daly's head. So why was Gordon's project such a problem? What the producers in Game of Wool do is they take steeking and they make it seem like Gordon's choice to use that very traditional technique for being the cause of him not finishing his vest. And we know it's not the cause for him not finishing his project because Gordon has told us. Gordon now has his own YouTube channel and he has shared his experience on Game of Wool. Of course, I will link to that video up here and down in the description box below so you can show him some love. But to spoil Gordon's YouTube video a little bit, the reason he didn't finish his tank top had nothing to do with the Steeks. Turns out he made a mistake and he had to frog back about 20 rows of knitting. And I think all of us knitters know what it's like to make a mistake and have to frog back that much work, even if you're working in a chunky yarn. Look, I know as a show producer in a reality competition show, a lot of times there are several reasons why a contestant might fail at a challenge, and you often have to hone in on one, maybe two reasons. But I think when you're deciding on what mistake or setback to focus in on, it should actually be one of the reasons that the failure occurred. This sort of misrepresentation, if it comes out to the public, undermines the credibility of the show itself. We now know we can't trust the edit to tell us what really happened. The other issue I have is such a missed opportunity because the fact of the matter is Gordon had a mistake in his knitting. He had to frog back 20 rounds. That has tension in it. That has drama in it. Other people can see that this has happened and they can comment on it. We get none of that story. Gordon makes a design choice to add a pocket and it fails. We never get to hear anything about it. It's just left as like, there's this random hole there for reasons. In my opinion, it's just not great storytelling. I think the problem is the producers of Game of Wool aren't really all that interested in using the knitting itself to create story. I hope that you're enjoying my notes on Game of Wool thus far. If so, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your other yarn-loving friends. And if you want to take your support a little bit further and contribute to the Yarn Fund that helps me purchase supplies for video tutorials and demonstration, please consider leaving me a tip through YouTube Super Thanks or buy me a coffee. If I was a producer at Game of Wool, one of the biggest changes that I would make to the show is actually show the knitting. I'm kind of shocked by how little of the knitting experience I'm actually getting. And I think it's odd because I think even though knitting is a slow craft, there's definitely mistakes and errors that happen that can add to the challenges. I just dropped a stitch, for example. Drop stitches happen. Watching the show, you would never think that a knitter dropped their stitch or had a miscount, missed a color change if you're doing Fair Isle, or got, a tangle of yarn sources when you're doing Intarsia. You wouldn't think that their hands, after 12 hours of knitting, aren't tired, cramping, don't need to stand up just to stretch your legs. Well, maybe the magical yarn barn is magical. No, of course it's not. It's that the edit isn't showing us those moments. In fact, in show one of the contestants early on says,
I thought I was behind, but I'm back on track now. I'm so delighted. It's really exciting.
Well, how did she fall behind? What happened that caused her to fall behind? Never mind not showing us, she doesn't even tell us. And as a knitter, I want to know these things. And yes, I'm sorry. The show might be geared towards a broad audience, but part of your audience, I would even argue your core audience, are knitters. We want to know these things. And as a reality show producer, I know that those sorts of moments can add to the sense of tension and drama. I mean, like, the clock is ticking, right? And yet you have to stop for a moment and stretch your hands. And part of your brain is probably going like, oh, I wish I could just keep knitting, but I gotta rest my hands. Or even you could have one of the contestants say, I know it's counterintuitive, but if I don't take breaks every 20 or 30 minutes, I'll actually start knitting slower. That would be kind of an interesting insight for people about knitting, that actually taking more breaks can keep you knitting faster. I have a whole video about this, by the way, if you want to check it out. I'll link it up here and down below. Instead, I think what the producers are doing is really relying on the clock to drive the tension and drama. And I understand to some degree why that might be the case. It's an easy thing for anyone in the audience to understand. And the clock, of course, is going to add some natural tension and drama.
And how are you doing, Dipsy?
Honestly, I haven't got the time, sorry.
It's a funny moment. It's a very good character moment. But I find it hard to believe that in 10, 12 hours of knitting, we're not seeing the contestants stand up and take more breaks. Nope. Instead, everybody is just sitting and knitting as quickly as they can.
I am whizzing up my front piece. Unfortunately, the whizzing is not quite as whizzy as it should be.
Now, I want to be fair. I do know that we're talking about the first couple of episodes. You still have a lot of contestants and time constraints for how long an episode can be. It might be as we get more episodes, we start seeing more of the inherent challenges of knitting get worked into the story and competition. And I really hope that's the case. But in the first 2 episodes, I think we're kind of missing some of the natural drama that occurs when you are making pretty things with pretty string. I think it's a missed opportunity. I think it makes the show, frankly, a little uninteresting for me as a knitter. And, well, as a general audience member, I kind of question if they really understand much of what's going on at all, other than the fact that there's a ticking clock and Tom Daly is very charming. And by the way, Tom Daly is very charming. I think his role as host is like perfect for him. I'm glad he's not actually one of the judges, but they really are having him serve as a presenter. And I think that's the perfect role for him. But there's another part of them not really showing the knitting that's kind of driven me crazy in the first couple of episodes. One is we're not really getting a good look at the knitting itself. In show 2, in the team challenge, they have to do intarsia with mohair. My God, that's mean. So mean. But Meadow, who by the way has never done intarsia before, at the judging, they point out like, oh, you have these holes here in intarsia. You want to not have holes. You want to avoid that. And the problem starts when they set up the challenge and describe what intarsia is.
To create their bold 80s motifs, knitters must use intarsia, a technique used to create distinct blocks of colour.
But they don't explain what the challenge of intarsia is. They don't explain about how you're using different yarn sources, and that when you are switching from one color to the other, you have to do it in such a way that you don't create a hole in the fabric. In fact, you can barely tell that they're using different yarn sources for each color block, and I have to imagine that would have been a nightmare with mohair. And because they don't explain that when they're setting up the challenge, when you get to the judging, you don't really know what the basis for all of it is. And I just think that it sort of glosses over the knitting, and the show is supposed to be about the knitting and the crocheting, right? No one expects a tutorial from a game show, but that doesn't mean that you can't learn something along the way. When I've worked on shows for Food Network or HGTV, one of the common things that we talk about is making sure we have takeaways. Takeaways are just little bits of information or tips or tricks that you can learn about the niche as you're watching the game, because at the end of the day, this is a game show. And I would actually argue that the takeaways are part of the enjoyment of watching these shows. And for Game of Wool, there's so many opportunities to work in a takeaway or two. You don't have to have one in every act, but having one, at least one, in each challenge should be pretty doable. And that, I think, is usually the goal. And the takeaway can be anything from like, when you're working in Tarja, how do you manage the different yarn sources? Are you using yarn butterflies? Are you using bobbins? Like, how you doing it? What's your approach? I mean, these contestants are knitting to be named Britain's best knitter. I have to imagine that they have some tricks in their project bags, and I wish the show would give them an opportunity to share them. In fact, I think we get to hear surprisingly little from the contestants on the show, and that's something else I would change. Tom Daly is a delight on the show, I think, but I could do with a little less Tom Daly and a bit more Holger.
It does represent me, a nonchalant chicken.
Okay, Holger is my favorite, granted. But not just Holger. I could do with getting to know all of the contestants better. I think for me, in the first 2 episodes, the team challenge has actually been the best part of the show. And that's because the contestants actually get to interact with each other. And through those interactions, I feel like I'm getting to know them better.
Gordon, did you say you did knitting at school?
Oh, yes.
Even as a boy?
I've always been a boy. No.
I probably should have picked up on it in show 1 when Tracy used fringe to finish her vest, but I really just thought that was a clever solution to running out of time. In show 2 is when you get to find out that Tracy really loves embellishment, and the clash between Holger and Tracy over embellishments with the Intarsia project is hilarious. And it's entertaining, and it's not mean-spirited. I feel like it's kind of everything you want from a cozy contest show that Game of Wool is supposed to be.
You know what I think is super 80s is this whole kind of like scar black and white checkerboard look. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, and then we can put silver or
And then-
something down that.
Right. Well, yeah, no, it's just I think the whole black and white against the color is quite strong.
We could put ribbons and embellishments. I've got lots of embellishments.
Yeah, hold on, Tracy, hold on.
80s jumpers were full of embellishments. We need to have embellishments on this.
Okay.
And I think that's the thing that as a reality show producer, I'm just surprised how I don't feel like I'm getting to know the contestants very well. Now, granted, this is just the first 2 episodes. There's still a lot of contestants. You're not going to be able to focus on all of them in such a short amount of time, and some personalities are just going to spark harder than others. But I think that it's really important in shows like this to try to fit in character moments when you can, so that the audience can start getting to know these people. Because when you get to know them is when you start to care about them. And the more we care about the contestants, the more stakes there are. We talk about stakes a lot in reality television, and it's just about what do people want, why do they want it, and how badly do they want it. So the higher the stakes are, the more compelling the story is. And the lower the stakes are, well, things tend to get boring. And I think, in my opinion, as a reality producer with Game of Wool, everything right now is feeling a bit low stakes. Part of the reason of that is I don't feel like I'm getting to know the contestants. I don't feel like I'm getting inside their head and what their experience is like as they are trying to knit in a very short amount of time. And I think hearing from them more in interview or in conversation with each other as they're doing the challenges would make the show more compelling than it sometimes is. Now, I want to be fair. I'm hopeful that as there are fewer contestants on the show, we will get to hear more from them because there are less sort of personalities that you have to cover. My hands are getting a little tired. I might need to take a little break from the knitting. Could I keep talking and nitpicking about the Game of Wool? Of course I could. I'm a reality show producer. A huge part of my job is giving notes. It's what I do naturally. And if I'm honest, after Going over all of this, you might think I must really hate the show Game of Wool. And truthfully, I don't. I actually find the show to be overall quite charming. I think, as I said earlier, I think Tom Daly is a delight. I'm very happy to see that they have 2 judges who are very knowledgeable. In fact, I'd like to hear more of their thoughts about I can't go on. I have to stop here. I think the team challenges in the first 2 episodes were interesting. I especially liked that they yarn bombed a couch. In fact, I wish they had couched that challenge as yarn bombing instead of describing it as making a slipcover, because again, you could have described something about yarn communities that knitters do, but I digress and I have to stop giving notes that nobody asked for. And I want to be clear, I respect the work that the producers of Game of Wool are doing and the knitters that are on the show. I do know how hard it is to make any kind of reality show and crack the code on all of this. And I do see that it is a particular challenge to take a slow craft like knitting and put it into a timed competition like we see on Game of Wool. And I think my biggest thing as a knitter is I want to see more of the knitting. And I want to see that explanations of the knitting and why knitters succeed or fail in the challenges are accurate. And that's really my biggest critique in a way of the show, is that they are glossing over some of the details. And I think that some of those inaccuracies are really happening because this is being produced by people who are not knitters. That's not to say that they don't have people on the show who knit, but I think there is a distinction you can make between people who knit, casual knitters, and people like myself where we've made knitting part of our whole personality, if not our entire personality. A capital K knitter. I understand that Game of Wool is a show that is being targeted towards a broader audience than just knitters. However, knitters and people who knit are definitely a part of that audience. In fact, I'd argue that it's the first people who are going to be interested in a show like this, which means you gotta strike a balance between servicing people who know about knitting and people who don't. And after 2 episodes, I don't think Game of Wool has quite hit that balance between entertaining both people who knit, knitters, and a general audience. Still, I'm gonna keep watching and I'm gonna keep seeing how the episodes improve or don't improve as it goes along. And by the end, I think we'll have a final verdict on whether I think Game of Wool is a winner or should have been frogged from the beginning. All right, that is it for me today, but it doesn't have to be it for you. Right about now, a video suggestion is going to pop up. So if you'd like to keep knitting and watching videos with me, I will meet you there. Otherwise, I hope that you have a wonderful day, evening, weekend, weeknight, whenever you might be watching this. And as always, happy health and happy making. Bye.